Get out of zone.
Yeah, first, congratulations on your book, Canadian Primal.
Thank
It's an extraordinary book, and on the back cover, there's all these amazing blurbs. But they're out, and they're all absolutely right. But one says it's ebullient, intelligent, and eminently readable, and I wholeheartedly agree. So yeah, it's a remarkable book. Could you maybe start by telling a little bit about the book and what inspired you to uh, write it? And then also, I'd love to hear how you chose the title, Canadian Primal.
the title. Yes, there were many candidates. Many were called. Only one was chosen in the end. Well, the book came about. First, though, before I go into that, just allow me to express my thanks to you for being interested in Canadian Primal and for taking the time to sit with the book for as long as you did and for as carefully as you did. It's very gratifying for me to know that the book did indeed find one dedicated reader. I think I shared this with you before, but Jorge Luis Borges once said that the ideal number of readers for a book was 37, like not 37,000, 37 period. And
Okay.
he's too fewer than 37, and it's just depressing because it means you spent all of this work and poured all of this labor into something that very few people actually picked up. But more than 37 is too much of an abstraction. You simply can't hold a large number of readers in your mind. You can't imagine them all as individuals. So it
Right.
sounds like you're one of the 37. It sounds like you made the cut. You're one of the 37, and my thanks to you for that.
Well, yeah, I'm honored to be one of the 37. And, I went through my file cabinets yesterday because I'm sure I read an essay by you. I don't know, it would be like probably 2005, something like that. And I think that's the first time um, I read something that so thoroughly thought about these five poets, and it really struck me. And from that moment on, I've been following your writing. And this obviously isn't your first book about these writers, but yeah. So I'm a fan. I'm a definitely one of the 37.
An outwriting member of their group in your own right. I mean, it's not just the five of them. There are these other outer rings of people who are involved in what those five poets are up to. And I think you demonstrated a long time ago that you were a member of the outwriting gang, not in terms of your own writing, including, if I have the title right, Year of the Horse, Summer of the Horse.
Summer of the Horse, yeah.
And
Yeah.
not just including Summer of the Horse, but your involvement with the art camp at which both Don Mackay and Tim Lulburn were participants. So you are an outrighting member in your own right, I think, as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, so how did you become inspired by these? I mean, I know in the book it says that you were looking for a subject for your thesis, and you came across thinking and singing. And would you call that moment a primal experience? Is that
No,
okay?
no. I mean, there were certainly no shortage of important foundational soul-shaping experiences in the writing of this book, or big experiences that the writing of this book led me to. But that initial encounter with the Thinking and Singing book, that the first book to bring together those five authors, published in 2002 by Cormorant Books, that was more an experience akin to, I think, what's the term? A golden thread. The American poet William Stafford once wrote about the importance of paying attention to golden threads, to those little signals emanating from our surroundings that say effectively, come here, there's something for you, but only if you're willing to take a few steps in this direction. So it was more of an inkling than anything else. That initial encounter that I had with thinking and singing, you know, actually holding that beautifully designed book in my hands. I think Cormorant did just a wonderful job with the design. Tanis Goddard, I think, was the designer. Just a wonderful job putting that book together. And I mean, the colors they chose, that blend of gray and blue, I mean, it literally seems to glow as far as covers go. Yeah. And so I was intrigued, you know, when that book landed in my hands. And of course, as you know from the afterword, I was familiar at that point with Robert Bringhurst from A Short Story as Sharp as a Knife, and with Don Mackay from Another Gravity. And I had heard tell that there were other people involved in their conversation as well. So I didn't go in completely cold to that experience of picking that book up. But it was that sense of there being a significant promise of meaning. There was clearly something fascinating going on there. And even when I sat with the book and read over its contents, I didn't understand, to be honest, I didn't understand everything. I understood maybe 50% of what was going on. Perhaps that's even generous to say as much. 50% might be more like 30%. But I knew that something important was happening, and I wanted to find out what it was. So I was hooked.
I totally agree with that for myself. You know, I've been reading Jan Zwicky's work. You know, I've been a fan for so long, and I don't understand everything that she writes about, but I get the feeling from it that something is really true there, and something that compels me to just keep reading. Like it's for her, for me, reading those kinds of works are like a balm, even if I don't really understand what's going on. There's just something emanates from them.
I think that's an excellent way of putting it. Something emanates from them. And I think almost as first principle, we have to acknowledge that these poets are only pointing. That's all they're really doing. They are signposts. They're pointing at something. And I think for the perceptive reader, you get that sense that there is meaning to be had here. They're pointing at something really important, even vital. Right. So what is it that they're pointing at? Because I think we can sort of get stuck in thinking that the inquiry stops with them and with them alone. And it's no. There's something so much bigger that they are all signaling in their own ways. And are we willing to take up that challenge and do the work that they are asking us to do, and follow that golden thread that constitutes their work? Follow that golden thread deeper and deeper into something that exists well outside of, well beyond colonial reality. Right.
That kind of leads to another question I had. All the poets in this book are Euro-Canadian inhabitants of unceded or treaty land. How do you see their work alongside the thinking and writings of Indigenous people and cultural authorities, or do you see what they're doing in a different context altogether?
No, I think they belong within the same continuum of possibility as with Indigenous authors, cultural authorities, and elders. I think one of the differences, there are many differences, but one of the differences is that Indigenous writers, cultural authorities, and elders are part of a tradition that's been following the golden thread for so much longer, for millennia, really. They're so much further along in that work of touching something that is more than us. Yeah. So with the thinking and singing poets, yes, they're working off ancestral traditions, the different ancestral traditions that they themselves engage with. But they're only one lifetime, even just a part of one lifetime, into a process that other peoples have been involved with and have embarked on dating back thousands of years. So I see the poets of thinking and singing as constituting a really important point of departure, a vital breakthrough from colonial reality. And they've just started. This is just a first step, I think, among non-Indigenous writers. to acknowledge that there's something greater than us, that is land vested. It's just a vital, important, small, but necessary step.
Right.
So they've accomplished what Dennis Lee might call a precious little, but it's still a precious little. That's still something very important. And we can build off of that, because ultimately it takes hundreds, if not thousands of years for people as a collective to arrive at a deep and sustained engagement with the genius of a specific place. That's big work, and it takes many lifetimes. We have to start somewhere, though. And the place where we start is where we actually happen to live, here in colonial modernity, surrounded, if not encumbered by our technologies. It's where we were born into, and it's the place that we must necessarily start from. They give us that starting point.
Great. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that most, if not all of the poets in Canadian Primal are a bit averse to technology. And some make the point that, how technology serves as this barrier between the intangible and our tangible physical engagement with the natural world. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you think technology might work against meaningful engagement with the natural world, or if you think it does.
Wow, that's a very big question, a very complex question, especially here in Canada. In Canada, in a way, and I'm speaking to non-Indigenous Canadian society. We're fortunate in the sense that we do have this established tradition of non-Indigenous Canadian writers and thinkers being exceptionally critical, asking really tough questions, and arriving at all kinds of penetrating insights about the nature of technology. So we can go back to Harold Innis, Marshall McLuhan, George Grant, Ursula Franklin, and others, these philosophers and historians who have said, well, no, we need to be a little bit more circumspect and a little bit more scrupulous in our relationship with our technologies. And we have to ask really difficult questions about our technologies. I teach a course at Trent called Canada the Land. And it's one of the original flagship courses in the humanities at Trent. And one of the things that I ask my students to do is to take for themselves a sitting spot, someplace out of doors where they have to go and check in with that spot, at least minimum once a week. And it is a live issue for a generation that has been reared entirely within the cocoon of digitality, as these students are. It's a live challenge for them to go into those spaces and negotiate some sort of a relationship to their phones. Otherwise, they'll just sort of be on their phones the entire time. And if you're paying attention to what you're scrolling and you're not paying attention to your surroundings, then there is a disconnect, a dangerous disconnect. We're too busy paying attention to one thing and not another. And I do agree with Tim Lilburn, especially in the sense that, we become what we pay attention to. If we pay attention to beautiful things, those beautiful things will make us more beautiful inside of ourselves. As a result, we will become more beautiful people. And if we pay attention to that which is not beautiful, if we pay too much attention to that which is of our own making, it is possible, I think, to get lost in those spaces, in those technological spaces. Now, the one caveat that I would sort of throw out there is that for me, I wonder if the poets of thinking and singing are almost absolutist in their rejection of technology. Who among us has not benefited from medical technology over the course of our lives? Who among us has not benefited from a course of antibiotics that staved off an otherwise devastating illness or infection? It is my sense that perhaps there's a little bit more room for negotiating a shared existence with technology than these poets allow. Right. For those of us who had to make that transition to Zoom over the last year and a half, say with teaching, yes. I, for one, have found this to be a rewarding medium, and meaningful conversation still happens through this interface. And I'm not so sure that all the poets of thinking and singing would agree with that.
Right.
But this is the world we live in.
It is, yes. And in writing your own book, you did a lot of your reading and thinking outside in gardens and parks. So,
and on buses and trains.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey in drawing closer to the natural world through that and through the writing of this book, if the book did that?
I think the writing of the book accelerated a process that I embarked on the moment I was born. And I think that holds true for all of us. I think the world offers itself to all of us. It offers itself to our senses the moment we arrive. And because of the way our culture is structured, we can fall away from that initial intense encounter with otherness, with beauty that was always present from the very start. We can sort of forget that it was possible to be so at home in the world, to be so captivated by the plants, by other non-human beings around us, by the simple fact of the sky or the fact of night. We can forget how magical these things really are. Our culture seems to steer us away from engaging, from honoring that initial encounter and graduating beyond it to more sophisticated ways of relating to our surroundings. So that process was very much already at work in me from the very beginning. And in the personal coda to Canadian Primal, I talk about how important it was for me in my 20s to leave North America, to leave the West altogether, and go and live in some place where people still paid close attention to their surroundings, and how that was such a healthy, vital corrective in my own life. How absolutely critical it was for me to live in Indonesia for 3 years and to recover a sense of the magic of my own surroundings, to recover a sense that I could go outside and be made better, feel happier as a result of what I was encountering. I think what thinking and singing, engaging with the poets of thinking and singing, what that did is it shifted that development up several notches. It sped up that learning process exponentially, because here we're five hyper-intelligent individuals who had not lost contact with their own bodies, who had not lost touch with their own hearts. And they sort of introduced me to all of these intellectual and spiritual and philosophical ancestors from the human family who for millennia had been embarked on that process of rapprochement with their surroundings. So with the poets of thinking and singing, it really helped me find words, find concepts, identify not just an intellectual language, but a holistic language by which I could become more consciously aware of what had been happening to me all life long. And I think which applies to all of us as well. We're all called by all of this into a more intimate relationship with it. And these poets, I think, are wonderful tutors, and they're wonderful trail guides for people who really want to take on that difficult but incredibly delightful, rewarding work of getting to know a particular place.
You know, there's so many poignant, powerful ideas raised in this book, but the one that struck me probably the most was this idea of a musical resonance in nature. Robert Bringhurst says in your book, The Measured Motions of the Earth. And of course, it's part of your subtitle as well, Poets, Places, and the Music of Meaning. When I read about Jan Zwicky, realizing that the landscape she grew up on in Mayerthorpe was in E minor, it just kind of blew the top of my head off. It's like how she says she can in certain places hear the land's music. And Robert Bringhurst talks about thought music and the measured, motions of the earth again. And you write in your own journey of drawing closer to the land that you started to see incidents and events in your life, they rhymed with each other, that they form little ecologies of meaning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
If there's any chief insight that these poets brought me to, precisely because they're poets, it would be that notion of a music of meaning. It would be that notion that if we really sit for a long time with the place, it will begin to go to work on us, and it will begin holding up for our inspection different component parts of our own lives. It will hold up for inspection certain memories, and then to those memories hold up others that are somehow connected, that somehow rhyme or echo one another. And I think I said in the personal coda that really was one of the great rewards of writing this book, recognizing that there is this music of meaning at play in our own lives. We can come to recognize the existence of these patterns within patterns at work in our own personal histories. And that is what allows us to come a little bit closer to it and even touch what a meaningful life really is. We recognize in those moments that our lives actually do make sense, that everything had to happen the way it did, including, and this is the hard part, including the vast disappointments, the failed relationships, the betrayals, and everything else, to recognize that those two had a place and were catalysts in their own right, sort of spurring us on. So places can do that for us. They can teach us how to recognize the existence of meaningful patterns in ourselves. And I think when we get to that point, when we recognize that our lives are intrinsically meaningful and that places can help us realize that meaning, then, as Tim Lilburn would say, we're good, we're done. We don't have to go anywhere searching for meaning. We don't have to tear the world apart searching for meaning. We don't have to trample on other people's rights in our search to satisfy our own craving for meaning. We're good. We can be where we are, and we can be satisfied and reasonably content in our own places. This is a huge accomplishment, a huge breakthrough that I think is of global importance. We can be where we are, we can stay put, and it's all good.
Great. Wow. Wonderful. Wonderfully said. I don't know if this word is in your book, but I think it was in one of the reviews of your book, and it was Samantha C, and it's like the mutual learning through interaction. And I think these five, poet philosophers, I mean, it feels remarkable that they found each other, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it was that's just a natural way it worked out. But they've been in conversation for many years, and they've been informed and challenged by that interaction of each other's ideas. And I wondered how important you think that conversation that those five have had has been in their own individual work.
Wow. Well, for a start, it's clear again to me that you've engaged with this material on a very deep level. Samantha C is a word that only comes up once or twice in the book. Nora Bateson, daughter of cyberneticist, philosopher, environmentalist Gregory Bateson, is the individual who coined that term. Yeah. And even though Samantha C, this idea of learning together, of mutual thinking, even though it only occurs, but a couple of times in the book, it is, for me, right at the center. It is right at the center of what they've done. This notion that we don't always have to be in competition together with one another. This notion that we can actually put our heads together and through conversation and correspondence, arrive at a higher level of understanding, at a higher plane of consciousness. Wow, we really are in our very infancy as a culture, and I'm speaking to us here in technological modernity. We are only in our infancy, at the very beginning of recognizing that these kind of energetic shapes exist. That we can build these sorts of structures using only each other, working with one another in a spirit of cooperation and community. And we can arrive at these fascinating levels of consciousness together, these energetic shapes. And I ask the question in Canadian Primal, what do those collective energetic shapes do that the individual thinker cannot accomplish on her own? Because if we can answer that question, I think there is a bridge that opens up between those energetic bodies and what Indigenous communities have been doing vis-a-vis their own surroundings for millennia. So it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a community of human beings who are thinking and feeling together to be able to bridge their way into relationship with these larger invisible forces that First Nations peoples have been urging us to take seriously their existence for as long as we've been in conversation with them. Wow. So it's a big word, this notion of Samantha C, and this sense of people learning how to put aside that competitive streak and think together, put their minds and hearts together. All kinds of doorways and portals open up when we're willing to align ourselves with one another. And it happens in every single meaningful conversation. It can happen there, you know, in these one-on-one encounters. We can arrive at that higher plane. Wow,
what a hyper intelligent, thoughtful person you are. This has just been so fantastic. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to bring up?
Oh, well, there is so much more we could talk about. Yeah. I am more interested, in all honesty, in other passages that you yourself gravitated towards as an astute reader in your own right.
Well, I was thinking about like a lot of the writers in this book in their own work do polyphonic work where they put independent thoughts and ideas together, and then something kind of gives rise out of that is kind of the ineffable. And as I was reading through the book, I guess one of the things I thought toward the end is like these five poets in their conversation are like those polyphonic voices that have been placed. They're, you know, fiercely intelligent, independent, and yet they've put themselves beside each other, and out of that has come this, as we've said, something that maybe is not you can't really, it's not concrete in any way, but it's very meaningful. There's some kind of truth that arises from, so they are themselves a polyphonic work in a sense.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant observation. Not a single one of them surrenders their individual autonomy for a second.
No, it's true.
They remain, resolutely themselves at every step of the way, even though they're involved in this larger sharing. And I think you're absolutely right. They constitute, they create a polyphonic structure of their own making. And this goes back to Samantha C. What happens when we do that? What happens when we engage with one another without surrendering our own autonomy while remaining actively and energetically involved? What kind of a space opens up? And more importantly, when we do that, what or who can enter into that space they've created? What Tim Lilburn calls that five-pointed conversation, right? In the back cover copy to Thinking and Singing. That to me is the fascinating question. And again, one of those places where we can begin building a bridge with Indigenous cultural authorities, elders, and writers who have been into these ideas, into these practices for so long. So what can enter into that space? Donna, have you ever practiced a polyphonic poem, one of Bringhurst's polyphonic poems with a friend or a couple of friends?
I haven't. I mean, I've read them, but yeah, it has to sort of be read out loud, and I haven't done that.
It is a fascinating experience, yeah. And I recommend it to anyone to actually, take a poem like New World Suite Number 3, which is written for 3 voices, and assign a part to, each of one of 3 people, and then perform it together, and time and space begin to shift. Time slows down because you're not paying attention to the clock, you're paying attention to one another's voices. Mm-hmm. And you really do feel that you enter into something different and other than colonial.
Right. Wow. Okay. I will do that. I did hear Robert at a reading once where he had 3 voices and read from his work, and it was super powerful. So yeah, wow. Well, for anyone who's, I mean, this has just been such a rewarding conversation for me. And this book, it really is, it just opens up so many ideas. Like we could go on and on, but what you've done in this book, I think, is so important. It's kind of like you say, the beginning of a group of people who, in colonial thinking, I guess, not necessarily them, but in that sector, where they came out and they are kind of the first in Canada to be the eco poets. I think they started that whole thinking. And how you've written this book is just so readable, so entertaining, and so intelligent. So I would highly recommend it to everyone. Yeah, what you've said is just really inspiring.
Thank you. That's a very generous assessment of the book, and I'm grateful.
All right. Well, great talking to you, and I hope we can continue this conversation over the years. Yeah.